Alright, I am back with another video, and today we've got a pretty interesting one. I was sat in a call with one of my friends and I just said, hey, give me a random combination of two classes and I'll make a video on it. And they said, Ranger and Sorcerer, which at the time seemed like a pretty daunting task, for classes don't exactly mesh well. Until I looked at it for more than 10 seconds. I was quite surprised to find some pretty damn good thematic synergy between a certain Ranger subclass and a certain Sorcerer subclass to create what I think is almost a better Beastmaster Ranger. Now don't get me wrong, I love Beastmaster. I love the class fantasy of Beastmaster. But the problem is that Beastmaster has never really been good for this channel because we're all about multiclassing here, and in this game, if you want to get the most out of Beastmaster, you kind of have to go with all of your levels in Ranger, so it's very hard to make builds with it. But what if we could turn the concept on its head and build a kind of Beastmaster, but in a different way, leaning into other things like the shadows and such like that. A shadow Beastmaster, if you will. And as such, thanks to our combination with Sorcerer, we've got a pretty interesting multi-class here, which gives us a ton of different abilities that synergize together way better than I ever could have initially imagined, and create an interesting newer playstyle to take, with Sorcerer and Ranger being this odd fusion that just seems to gel a little bit. Now obviously there is some friction, especially the leveling scheme, in which you're kind of going to have to prioritize if you want to be more of a Ranger or a Sorcerer in the early game. Either way, you're going to be delaying extra attack by a couple of levels, as well as your spell progression for Sorcerer, so there is going to be a bit of growing pains with this one, depending on what you want to play first. Usually, you're probably just going to want to be a Ranger first and foremost, and kind of work your way up from there. And that's kind of a level scheme I'll be presenting in this video, but otherwise, you can kind of decide if you want to be a Sorcerer first or a Ranger first, and let the abilities kind of be compatible when they are. You'll see what I mean as we go throughout the video, so let's get into the build. Now, for our species/race today, we are actually playing a half-orc. Not because I wanted to change things up a little bit and actually build a half-orc character, because I actually do really like doing that. They have abilities that are going to synergize really, really well with this build, and as such, I wanted to make use of that today. We're going to have the standard movement speed as well as dark vision, which will get upgraded a bit later, but we're also going to get relentless endurance, and this is the big one. If you reach 0 hit points, you regain 1 hit point instead of being downed. This is going to stack with an ability that we get later, meaning that we're basically going to be able to survive 2 death blows immediately without actually going down. So we're going to be incredibly resilient right off the bat. We're also going to gain access to savage attacks, allowing us to, whenever we land a critical hit with a melee weapon attack, we can deal an extra dice of weapon damage. Again, we're going to be building into this quite a bit, because as I was making this build, I realized how well half-orc synergizes with the two classes and subclasses that we're going to be using today, in order to create a pretty damn powerful build. I've also been listening to Critical Role lately, and I really like Fjord, so, you know, I wanted to build a half-orc. Leave me alone. We're actually going to be kicking things off as a Sorcerer, though, mainly because this is going to give us some basic abilities that are going to work really well with our kit, but also, I really, really want that Constitution saving throw proficiency we get by starting with Sorcerer, because this is going to help with some concentration spells that we're definitely going to want to be concentrating on a little bit further down the line. So make sure you kick things off as a Sorcerer. We're going to get to choose 4 cantrips as a Sorcerer, and to be honest, we've got the pretty standard affair here. We want Booming Blade as we are going to be a martial spellcaster, and this just gives us the ability to do extra damage each turn. There's no reason not to take it. Also, Firebolt is pretty much the bog standard for ranged cantrips, however you can choose to swap this with Ray of Frost if you want to substitute a bit of damage for a movement speed debuff. Honestly, either works. If you want to lean more into the necrotic theming as well, you can go with Bone Chill here. It's entirely up to you, but I think Firebolt is the bog standard that you should go for. Friends is just here because we are going to be a high charisma character, making us an effective party face, and as such, Friends just helps us along with that even more. And finally, Mage Hand for being a very useful utility cantrip, might as well keep it around. As for your 2 spells, you're going to play it pretty safe. Obviously, we're going to be taking Shield as normal, giving ourselves a buff to our Armour class when we need it as a reaction. However, we don't need Mage Hand today, as we are going to be using Armour from our range proficiencies, and as such, I decided to lean a little bit into the idea of like sort of necrotic energy being infused into our build with False Life. This is going to allow us to be even tankier than we normally would. We can upcast this with spell slots, giving us 7 temporary hit points per spell slot level, meaning that if we want to use what will eventually actually be a pretty tanky build and make it even tankier, False Life can just give us that extra little bit of longevity. Between False Life and the fact that we basically avoid 2 death blows, you're going to be able to stay in the fight a lot longer than most other characters. For our subclass today, we are going with Shadow Magic, because I'll be honest, I haven't really used it nearly enough since it's come out. This is going to give us 2 things right off the bat that are absolutely amazing. We're going to gain access to our superior dark vision, allowing us to see in the dark even further, as well as Strength of the Grave. Whenever you reach 0 hit points, you will regain 1 instead of becoming downed. Now, I have actually managed to test this, and I can confirm, as was shown in the combat footage, that this ability and the Half-Orc ability do not go off at the same time, meaning that you are going to survive 2 death blows, which is really, really cool. This just means we're going to have this kind of undying nature to our character that, again, really kind of fits the theming that I'll be going for here. You'll see what I mean as we go. Background is Outlander, leaning more into the ranger stuff with this one. This is going to give us access to athletics and survival, but honestly, your background is a free choice. Now, for our ability scores, we have an 8 in strength, because unfortunately we don't need it despite how beefy we look. Dexterity is at 16, as it is going to be our main attacking modifier. Constitution is at 14. I would like this to be a little bit higher, and there would be kind of room to adjust if you like, depending on the equipment that you choose. However, 14 in Constitution is absolutely fine. Again, we're going to have ways of bumping up our HP with temporary HP, as well as being able to survive death blows, and we're going to have a pretty damn decent way of dodging attacks anyway, rather than taking them, because as you know, Shadow Magic involves the Darkness spell. Wisdom is at 12, just so we can get a little bit of use out of our ranger abilities, but honestly it's not necessary. It's mainly just there for the saving throws. And Charisma is at 16 for us being a party face and for our Sorcerer spellcasting. As for our skill proficiencies, you can kind of take whatever you like here. As I said, we've got athletics and survival from our background. We gain intimidation automatically because we are a half-orc. Again, half-orcs are just extremely stacked. And as such, we can throw deception and persuasion on here to make us the ultimate party face. Honestly, a really good start right at level 1. Now, you can go to level 2 of Sorcerer right away if you want to get your hands on the meta magic options, as well as, you know, just getting an extra spell slot so that you can cast a few more utility spells in the early game. However, I think most people who play this build would feel slightly more comfortable by going straight over to Ranger and start building that up, just to get our hands on things like extra attack as quickly as possible. But again, you can feel free to play around with the levels as you see fit. So, by switching over to Ranger now, we're going to gain access to simple and martial weapon proficiencies, as well as everything up to medium armor and shields. So overall, a pretty solid kit. We're not going to be using shields in this build, but we are going to be using medium armor and martial weapons, so that's a bonus. You're also going to gain access to a favored enemy feature of your choice. And really, it's up to you what you want to grab. Honestly, it's a free choice. It just depends on kind of what you want the most. If you want to go for heavy armor, absolutely go for Ranger Knight. There's nothing wrong with wearing heavy armor in this build. I just have gone for a medium armor because I think it worked the best. I also quite like Sanctified Stalker here if you want to go for something like that. But honestly, Bounty Hunter is my usual bet, just because it gives you the ability to get proficiency in investigation, as well as, you know, you can get a bit more usage out of Ensnaring Strike, which, if you're starting off with Ranger levels, might work out for you, despite the fact that we have a lower wisdom score. Giving them disadvantage on a saving throw does mean that we are going to be able to get this off pretty consistently. We also do get to choose a Natural Explorer feature as well, and honestly, it's entirely up to you, but I do like Urban Tracker for this build, simply because it gives you proficiency in Sleight of Hand, and since we're going to have a high dex score, that does feel pretty good, and it kind of fits in line with the build's identity, in my opinion. But of course, the best options are always going to be Wasteland Wanderer Cold, Fire, or Poison. Really, you can take your pick here, but I always like to go with something a little bit different when I can. And of course, we also do gain an extra skill proficiency just for picking this character, and we are actually, or going into this multiclass, I should say, and as such, we are going to grab Stealth, as we will be taking advantage of this throughout our playthrough. This is actually a stealth build. Thanks to our high strength and the ability that we'll have to cast Darkness eventually, we'll be able to actually get the jump on our foes quite a lot, or sneak through situations unnoticed. So Stealth, definitely up there in my book. Make sure you pick that up here. At Ranger level 2, we're going to get to pick a fighting style, and this is quite important. Make sure you grab 2-weapon fighting. 2-weapon fighting is going to allow you to fight using a weapon in your offhand and still gain the full damage of the attack from your ability modifier, because this is a dual-wielding build. I decided I did want to lean into the Ranger identity with this one, so we are going to be using both ranged weapons and dual-wielding here. Again, this is meant to be kind of a Ranger with a twist, so I'm trying to lean into the kind of the iconography of the Ranger, which is definitely dual-wielding, even if it doesn't show it here. We're also going to get some ranger spells, and that means ranger spell slots. So even though we're not leveling up in Sorcerer right now, we are still going to be able to further our spell casting with Sorcerer by getting some higher level spell slots as we progress in Ranger. Now, as for what you want to choose with these spell slots, really, that's entirely up to you. We are a high charisma character, so I am going to recommend Speak with Animals so you can get the full roleplay flavour of being a ranger while you play through the game. As for your second option though, it's entirely up to you. Hunter's Mark is a good choice, but it is a concentration option, and we're probably going to be concentrating on darkness more with this build. So really, I would maybe focus, if you're kind of respecing on like a higher level, maybe just focusing on utility stuff that you just cast and forget, like Enhanced Sleep or Long Strider. Really, anything that gives you movement speed is always good in this game, so honestly, it's entirely your choice. At Ranger level 3, we are going to get to choose our subclass, but first, another spell. We could pick up Ensnaring Strike here, since we have spec'd into it. Now, for our subclass, now, obviously I've gone onto record saying this is like a Shadow Beastmaster, but we're not actually playing Beastmaster. Instead, we're playing Gloomstalker. Gloomstalker is going to give you access to a ton of things that really make this build fun to play. First off, you're going to get Dread Ambusher, the main feature of the subclass. Basically, you gain a +3 bonus to your initiative rolls, and on the first turn of combat, you gain an increased movement speed, and you can make an additional attack that does not cost a resource that deals an additional 1d8 damage, plus whatever your weapon would normally do. So the effective idea of this is that on the first turn of combat, you just run in, do an extra attack with a big amount of damage, and then you're good to go. However, this is actually going to synergize really nicely with our Sorcerer levels as well, because it effectively gives us a setup turn where we can still do damage. Because when we're playing Shadow Magic, we're going to want to set up our darkness as quick as possible so that we can gain the advantage. This allows us to make sure we go early enough in the initiative that we are more than likely going to go first, or at least very early on in the turn order. Then we run into combat, throw down darkness, and we still gain access to Dread Ambusher. Maybe we have enough meta magic to cast darkness as a bonus action if we're not using the Eyes of Dark feature, which you probably will most of the time, as we don't have an inbuilt immunity to magical darkness in this case. But there may be options for you to kind of swing the fight in your favor by going for set up darkness with Eyes of Dark, then still get a Dread Ambusher attack off. It gives you a pretty strong opening, but doesn't feel like a complete setup turn where you're just setting up all your buffs and then you end, and then you can start acting on your next turn. It gives you a little bit more proactivity. You're also going to get the ability to hide as a bonus action, which is nice. That can help with the stealthy side of things, as well as the ability to turn invisible if you are obscured. Fun fact, when you're in magical darkness, you are considered obscured. So, by sitting in your darkness cloud, you can make yourself invisible wherever, whenever you like. Pretty damn cool. You're also going to gain access to Disguise Self as well, a fun little flavour spell. Could play into the idea that we're a half-orc that may not always be accepted wherever they walk, so Disguise Self could also help you get out of getting into prison because you probably stealth killed a guy. But you know, semantics. At Ranger level 4, we're going to get our first feat of the build, and if you're focusing more on Ranger, I would probably recommend bumping up your Dexterity first. Next up, at Ranger level 5, you're going to finally get access to extra attack, but also Misty Step, which is just a great utility spell to have, and means we don't have to take it as one of our Sorcerer spells later, freeing us up for another spell choice, because Sorcerer is a little bit limited in that regard. So, with Misty Step we can teleport around, and now we do even more damage with our extra attack. Perfect. No notes. We also gain access to level 2 spells at this point, and honestly, it's kind of up to you what you want to take here. A lot of these things are concentration options, so really they might not always be the best choice. However, if you want to lean into the stealth side of things, absolutely grab Passive Out Trace to allow your whole party to sneak around just as well as you can. And that is it for Ranger. I don't really feel a need to take any more Ranger spells, as I don't think we need another Favoured Enemy or Natural Explorer feature, so I want to go back over to Sorcerer here. So with Sorcerer, we're going to gain access to a few more things with level 2. We're going to get access to another level 1 spell of our choice from the Sorcerer spell list. Again, this is kind of just to pick your favourite thing. If you really want something that I think is just the bread and butter of most Sorcerers and is going to do you quite well, pick up Magic Missile. It's just always going to be a reliable source of range damage if you need it. You can also get to pick 2 meta magics at this level, and of course we're going to go for the usual suspects here. I definitely think Twin Spell is one of the best things you can go for if you want to go for a multi-hit spell, and I quite like the idea of having Distant Spell as well in this build, because you might find that you want to play at range as a ranger, maybe going for bow and arrow attacks here and there, so having the ability to cast a potentially battlefield, like a damaging spell, or maybe a battlefield control spell from that same distance, it's going to feel a lot better for you, so that's probably my recommendation. At Sorcerer level 3, we're going to gain access to the Eyes of Dark feature. Now, we gain the Darkness spell automatically added to our spell list. However, we can now also choose to spend 2 sorcery points instead of using a spell slot to cast Darkness, and as such, we cast Darkness, but now we also gain the ability to see in that darkness. So this basically just means that we can sit in our own darkness cloud. We don't need any special piece of equipment or ability that makes it so that we can see in that darkness. We just get to see in it for free. This is probably mainly what we're going to be using our sorcery points on, as we want to save our spell slots for other things. And we, again, unless you want to bring like the Eversight Ring or something, or maybe the Helldusk Helm in the late game, you probably just want to make it so that you can see in this darkness. So Eyes of Darkness is pretty much what you're always going to be using. And that's going to be our main concentration option as well. Moving on to spells. We now get access to level 2 ones, and there's a few options you can pick from. Shadowblade is a good weapon to dual wield if you want to go with that, but I decided to stay away from it from this build. Mirror Image can give you even more AC. Hold Person's always good, although that is another concentration option. I quite like leaning into the darkness aspect here and going for blindness. It's a non-concentration option, which does require a con save from the opponent, which so in the late game might not always be the best. However, though, because it's a non-concentration option, it feels pretty right, because you can keep darkness and this up if an enemy is refusing to come into your darkness. So, this will allow you to blind a creature completely, giving them disadvantage on attack rolls, and they cannot attack beyond 3 meters, and attack rolls against them will have advantage. So, and this is for 10 turns, based on your charisma modifier, just a con save to resist, and you can just cast it and forget it. If it goes off, great. If not, that's a bit of a shame. But it does fit the theme of the build, so I quite like it here. You also do get to pick another meta magic option, and while I do love Subtle Spell for the flavour here, you're not very often silenced in this game unless you're at that one part of Act 2, so really, Quicken Spell is always going to be the better option just to give you a little bit more flexibility in your spellcasting. Although again, we're mostly going to be using Eyes of Dark in this build. At level 4 of Sorcerer, you get to choose another cantrip. Honestly, again, it's a pick your favourite. I'll go with Bone Chill. We're also going to get to choose another level 2 spell. And I actually kind of want to lean into the druidic thing here that rangers kind of have and go with Web, because we never really take Web in any builds. And while this is a concentration spell, it does fit the theme quite nicely and can provide a decent alternative if you have creatures that are immune to blindness, in which case you can create a thick area of webbing that slows creatures down and can possibly enweb them. And if they're enwebbed, they cannot move, and attack rolls against them will have advantage, and their attack rolls will have disadvantage, and they'll also have disadvantage on dex saves. So this can kind of be like a pseudo-darkness for those who are immune to blindness, in which case you can throw this down, and if they get enwebbed, you basically get the same bonus as darkness, which works pretty nicely, although it's not going to stop ranged attacks. To be honest, this is more of a flavor pick. You can pick something else that you think might be more useful. You could go for Shatter, Scorching Ray, Enhanced Ability, Enlarge Reduce. You've got a lot of options available to you, so really, again, pick your favourite. But again, I never really take weapon builds, so I want to. We also do get to get another feat at this level, so I'm going to recommend bumping up our charisma here to give us a nice stat spread across the board. Sorry we haven't really got any interesting feats in this one, but just because of how the leveling scheme is and how we want to manage our levels, there's not really a good enough room to have a feat. There is potentially room for a half feat, like Actor or something like that. If you wanted to go maybe starting with a 17 in charisma, but honestly, we just kind of need the flat stats that we have a bit more, so feel free to experiment here, but honestly, this is what I would go with. At Sorcerer level 5, you're going to gain access to a level 3 spell of your choice. And honestly, there are a lot that you could choose from. Really, again, it's a pick your favorite. Obviously, Haste and Slow are always recommended. They are 2 very powerful spells. Though again, I did want to focus more on darkness with this build, so having those 2 concentration options always there just it doesn't really sit right with me. To be honest, my favourite one to grab here is actually Counterspell, just to give you a bit more defensive utility, being able to tank spells as well by just stopping them from even happening in the first place. At Sorcerer level 6, you get another level 3 spell, and again, it's really a pick your favourite type of deal. We have most of the things that I kind of want already from this build, so honestly, just take whatever you like. It really doesn't matter. Unfortunately, most of these are concentration options, but honestly, if we want to play into the classic Sorcerer, grab yourself a Fireball. Now, Also, at this level, we are going to gain access to the Hound of Ill Omen. This is effectively our beastmaster companion. We get to summon forth a Hound of Ill Omen, which is a spectral Shadowfellian dog. Is it the Shadowfell? No, it's not the Shadowfell. What is it? Monstrosity of some kind. Correct me, I've actually completely forgotten. Let me know in the comments below. But basically, this Hound comes with a few interesting abilities. Number one, it can bite people and give them an omen, meaning that if you hit the opponent with the element that that omen has kind of called for, whether it be fire, cold, whatever, they will take additional damage. There is also the ability where if it gets hit with an attack that isn't radiant damage, it will actually splinter off and create clones of itself that attack automatically. And you can keep this thing healed up by, using healing on it or whatever. You can also put it into your darkness cloud. It can see in magical darkness as well. So that means it will be pretty safe in there and be able to attack pretty consistently. So it can have a bit of tankiness as well. Overall, you just got kind of a lot going for you with this. And again, it kind of fits the Beastmaster vibe. But this also kind of shows where the leveling scheme is a bit of a problem. Because obviously my biggest complaint about Beastmaster was that you basically had to get to level 11 or 12 to make it worth it. And here, we get our beast at total level 11. So, a bit hypocritical of me, I understand. But of course, if you want to go with your sorcerer levels first, I mean, it's totally up to you. You can become a bit more of a sorcerer first and get more into the martial stuff later. That's the only thing with builds like this, is that sometimes the stats and the leveling scheme just make it a little bit, awkward to kind of choose and pick what you want first. I like to show my leveling schemes pretty much in the order I would take them in kind of bulk, but really you can divvy up the leveling a little bit as you go, depending on what you want. And since we are a dual wielder, perhaps the extra attack isn't so lost for a while, since we can always still attack with a bonus action. And also being a dual wielder does allow you to still always be able to attack with your offhand as a bonus action, while still casting spells as a main action. So it does give you quite a bit of freedom. Really, you're gonna have to play around with the leveling scheme a little bit to find what works for you, but still, Hound of Ill Omen plus Eyes of Darkness is a lovely combo for us, so we want to make sure we have it. Now, for this next level, I've got to address the big Warlock-sized elephant in the room, that being the Hexblade. You may be thinking why I've decided not to go with it today, and I'll explain why. As much as I love the Hexblade, and it would obviously add some synergy to this build, allowing us to attack with our Charisma instead of our Dexterity modifier, that only works for one weapon, and while technically we could put a Scimitar in the offhand that attacks with our spellcasting ability modifier anyway, I didn't really want to use that on this build, as I didn't really like it thematically, and I wanted to use some other weapons that I think worked better for the build. So no, unfortunately I've decided not to go with Hexblade today. I've decided to go for the Dex Charisma split instead. If you're not dual wielding, or you do use the Sylvan Scimitar in the offhand, then yes, you could throw a level of Hexblade in here, make yourself completely Charisma based, being able to bump down your Dexterity a little bit to maybe put it into some other stats or a feat of your choice. But honestly, the more I played and tested this build, the more I felt like Hexblade wasn't really doing as much other than just making the build slightly more clunky in places. Yes, it does add that Charisma synergy, and yes, Hex Warrior is a nice thing to have, and Hexblade's Curse, of course, which would synergize with the build by reducing the critical hit rate against an enemy, or increasing it, I should say, but I don't find it necessary for the build, and I don't often like doing triple multi-classes if I can help it. So really, I am going to be keeping Hexblade out of this one, but I did want to argue its corner because I do think it has a place in this leveling scheme, but it would also be figuring out where to put it, because that's still another level. You're delaying all of your other features and abilities. So you kind of do have to think with this one if you really want to include Hexblade in here, and where. At a final level respec, sure, why not? It's not really going to hurt you. Everyone loves a good Hexblade. But honestly, you're gonna have to really weigh how much you want to delay your other features to make Hexblade work. And again, if you're playing for dual wielding style, you're still gonna need that high dexterity anyway to really make it work, unless you're using a very specific weapon. So I know, before you ask, the Pact of the Blade Hexblade thing does not work, and we're not going to level 3 of Warlock anyway, so it doesn't even matter. So really, it's an optional 1-level dip. Entirely up to you. But I'm going to just keep it to 2. So, and since I don't really care for our 6th level of Ranger, I'm going to go for 7th level of Sorcerer. This is going to give us more sorcery points, which we do want for this build, access to total level 5 spell slots, which again, we do want for this build, as well as a level 4 spell of our choice, which of course I'm taking greater invisibility. Not only are we a high dexterity character with stealth proficiency, we are also going to be able to turn ourselves invisible not just with our obscure shadow feature from our Gloomstalker Ranger, we're also going to be able to grab this spell as well to make us consistently invisible too. If we don't want to take the darkness route and actually just go full stealth with a stealth suit that makes us completely invisible, we can keep going with invisibility based attacks and just continuously attack with advantage and become even more powerful. It just feels like a fun alternative way to kind of achieve the same goal. So yeah, level 4 spells, greater invisibility, works out amazingly. And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this is a pretty solid build. Like I say, the leveling scheme is going to make things feel a little bit awkward as you try to level up and decide whether you want to be more of a martial or a spellcaster first. But once you kind of get that blend together, it does feel very satisfying. There are multiple leveling schemes I can imagine for this build, like the one I showed today, or one where you go to maybe level 2 of Ranger early, getting that dual wielding, then putting those levels into Sorcerer, and as such, kind of becoming a left-handed spellsword in a way where you always have that offhand attack and your dread, and maybe your dread ambusher if you decide to push it to level 3, but then also you just still have the ability to spellcast, and you can get things like your Shadow Hound a bit early on, your Hound of Ill Omen. So really, just kind of play with the leveling scheme a bit. I know that's not exactly solid for what is effectively supposed to be a guide, but trust me, it is just something you have to feel out based on your playstyle. And again, my builds have never been about 100% telling you how to play, just giving you an idea that you can play with. That's the difference. That's why my builds have never been hard and fast, hard rules. It's just been, hey, here's a neat idea, and here's one way it can be done. Yeah, that's how it works. I like that explanation. But yes, overall, you're going to be a pretty effective character. You're going to be dodging pretty much everything with having disadvantage on attacks against you while sitting in darkness, also shutting down ranged attacks against you. You have the ability to shut down spells with counterspell. You have the ability to overwhelm your foes with, your darkness attacks, Misty Step, teleporting in and out, invisibility, your Hound of Ill Omen, doubling up on things, and even multiple ways to control the battlefield outside of darkness, like web. You also can take the stealthy approach with things like passive outtrace, or you're just naturally high stealth to be able to get you through a lot of situations that you might not want to deal with, and you're going to have incredibly high offensive output with things like Booming Blade, dual wielding, and some other things I'll get into later. Overall, it's a pretty standard spellsword package with a bit of a focus on the darkness spell and some abilities that go with it, and you are just going to feel like a bit of a blender when you really do get going. And again, we're leaning into the ranger aspect as well. You get the animal companion, and you get the ability to make attacks effectively both at close and long ranges. So yeah, no, I'm quite happy with how the build scheme turned out. The only thing I think is a little bit dangerous is our constitution, which is where there may be some wiggle room to which you could maybe have a slightly higher constitution in this build, depending on what you want to choose. Ranger Knight plus the Dwarven armor that gives you a +2 to your con could honestly work really nicely here. So again, it's a pick your poison kind of thing. You kind of have to choose what you want to go for in any given scenario. Really, you just got to play with the concept a little bit. I keep saying this, but it does work. Let's talk about the equipment and how it elevates the build even further. So, for our dual-wielding swords that we're going to be using today, we have two. First up, the Justiciar Scimitar. Pretty standard scimitar for most playthroughs. You're going to get this around Act 2, and it's basically just here for, the thematic flavor, but also it does synergize with the build. If you attack with advantage, you have a chance of blinding your target. This is going to happen all the bloody time, so those blinds are going to go off pretty consistently. You're also going to gain access to Shadow-Soaked Blow. You strike an enemy, adding your proficiency bonus to the damage. Moreover, if the attack hits, it deals an additional 1d6 psychic damage and doesn't break concealment. You can do this once per short rest. It's just a big, stealthy shadow attack, which just feels so right for this build. It's also one of the only +2 scimitars in the game, so it's basically a shoo-in as our main weapon. And you are going to want to have this in the main hand because this is a unique attack requiring it to be in the main hand to be used. For our offhand though, we're going to go with the Thorn Blade. While concentrating, your weapon attacks will deal an additional 1d4 poison damage. Since we're always concentrating on darkness, you will always have that extra 1d4 poison damage. It's only a +1 weapon, but the 1d4 poison obviously makes up for that in a big way. It also gives you access to Ensnaring Strike as a spell, the melee version, once per long rest, as using this cast like normal, nothing really crazy here. It's just there to be there, and you can have it in the offhand and still get it. We're mainly just here for the extra poison damage. So yeah, those would be my two weapons of choice. Again, I just feel like it works nicely for if we are dual wielding. I like having the extra poison damage, I like having the extra psychic damage. It just feels like it fits the build quite nicely. But again, if you're going the Hexblade route, you can replace the Thorn Blade with the Sylvan Scimitar that you can get in Act 2. Moving on, we also have access to the Knife of the Undermountain King as an earlier game option if you need something for Act 1, but also is a very, very good fit for this build, so I figured I would have to mention it. You can reduce the number you need to roll a critical hit while attacking by 1. This effect can stack. Obviously, this stacks with all of our other abilities that are going to do similar things, as well as our Orc's extra damage. When you roll a 2 or damage or less, you can reroll the die, taking the higher result. So again, even more damage. It's basically Savage Attacker built in. And you'll have advantage on attack rolls against slightly or heavily obscure targets. So honestly, it's a really good shout. It might be better than the Thornblade overall, actually, now that I'm really thinking about it. And actually, it kind of fits more aesthetically as well. Yeah, you know what? Maybe take this over the Thornblade instead. I was trying to go for a dual scimitar thing, but actually, Knife of the Undermountain King in the offhand, probably your better bet overall. I didn't use it in my testing, but it would definitely make the build more powerful indeed. And again, even further justifies that Hexblade level. I'm definitely going to leave that as an optional choice in the build's kind of description. Moving on to our ranged weapon for this build, we are going to be choosing the Dead Shot, again for that critical hit snacking, as well as the ability to double our proficiency bonus when rolling ranged attacks with this weapon, so we're very likely to hit. Also, for your early game bow option, take the Jolt Shooter, giving you a way of getting lightning charges, which can kind of buff up your build a little bit. Lightning charges giving you extra bonus to attack rolls and giving you extra damage as well through lightning damage, and eventually exploding into a big 1d8 lightning damage attack. So the Jolt Shooter, amazing early game option, then upgrade to the Dead Shot in Act 3 when you get your hands on it. Now, for the rest of the build, I actually kind of wanted to go for not using camp clothing mods today. I wanted to see if I could build something that was aesthetically pleasing with just the vanilla armor in the game to also kind of inform the flavor and the roleplay as well. So, for our headpiece, we have the Covert Cowl, so now we can toggle on and off a hood, which just feels absolutely badass, and I really, really like that. But either way, the Covert Cowl is pretty cool for us, as it allows us to, while obscured, so while in our darkness cloud, our critical hit threshold is reduced even more. So between this, which makes it a 19, the Knife of the Undermountain King, which makes it an 18, and the Dead Shot, which makes it a 17, plus if you took that Hexblade level, which is seeming more and more good the more I talk about it, you're going to have the ability to get critical hits on a 16 or higher, which is insane, especially when Orc and the Hexblade can do additional damage. So overall, it's pretty goddamn strong. Moving on though, you also have access to the Shadeslayer Cloak, which is also going to do the same thing while you are hiding. So you'll have to use your bonus action to hide as a Dread Ambusher while in your darkness, but you can absolutely do that, and then you will be able to gain a critical hit on a 15 or higher, which, you know, that's pretty damn cool. We're also going to gain access to the Sharpened Snare Cuirass, which again is part of the kind of aesthetically pleasing ranger angle of things, where you're going to be able to add your full dexterity modifier to your armor class, and creatures will have disadvantage on saving throws, and again when resisting your attacks and spells that inflict restrained. So technically, you don't need to take Bounty Hunter if you take this one. In fact, maybe Ranger Knight would be better. Entirely up to you. I always forget that those two overlap. My apologies. Now, the gloves are kind of a free choice. In fact, you could go with the gloves of dexterity on this build if you wanted to really max out the ability stat points, and again, that might help with the whole Hexblade deal. But I wanted to go with the Daredevil gloves here because it really helps bridge the gap between spellcasting and melee fighting. You get a +1 bonus to your spell attack rolls, which is always nice to do. But while this is toggled on, your ranged spell attacks will be made as melee attacks while you are adjacent to a hostile creature. This means that you won't be attacking at disadvantage if you suddenly need to cast a spell while in melee range. Now, while this doesn't come off often, it is still really nice if you want to throw in cantrips here and there to maybe debilitate your opponents or deal different damage types, especially if you're trying to match your Hound of Ill Omen's Omen type. And obviously, this is also an early game pick. You get this around the same time you'd get the Gloves of Dexterity, so honestly, it's either or. Pick your favorite. And then finally, the Boots of Striding. You can cast a spell. Whenever you cast a spell that requires concentration, you gain momentum for 1 turn. That means you're going to get a little bit of extra movement speed when you first cast your darkness, but also, while you are concentrating, you cannot be knocked prone or moved against your will. This helps to stay in the darkness, because being knocked prone immediately drops concentration, but now that's not a thing. Fuck you, Still Watchers. But also, you cannot also be moved against your will, which means you cannot be pushed out of your darkness cloud, meaning that you can hunker down and stay in there, keeping up your protected area. So overall, pretty good thing. You get this right away in Act 1, not a big deal. As for your amulet, there wasn't really anything that I liked for this build, so I just picked up an amulet of Misty Step once again, just give us an extra Misty Step per short rest. There's also the two kind of shadow rings here to kind of help with the build as well. The Ring of Twilight, I should say, is going to give you a +1 bonus to your armor class while you are obscured, so while you're in darkness, you're getting a +1 to your AC as well as the disadvantage on attack rolls against you. You're also going to gain access to the Shadow Cloaked Ring as well, meaning that while you are in lightly or heavily obscured darkness, basically, so while you're in your darkness spell, all of your attacks will deal an additional 1d4 damage as long as they are with a weapon or your unarmed strikes, which of course for us that means we can attack a bunch of times in a turn, potentially up to 3 with Dread Ambusher, so all of those being an extra 1d4 is pretty nice. That could be an extra 3d4 damage on your first turn and then an extra 2d4 damage on every subsequent turn, because even if you run out of spell slots, you're still going to be kicking ass as a dual-wielding fighter, so really, it's entirely up to you. But yeah, no, I really like these two rings for this. I honestly recommend them though. Finally, for our dyes, most of the outfit here is coloured in the Harlequin black and white dye, with the exception of the cloak, which I did colour in a pure black dye from Yulia's dye, which is a mod available to all platforms, so you can just pick this up from the mod manager. No sweat. But yeah, that is going to do it for this build, and overall I'm quite happy with it. It's a really, really nice kind of twist on, you know, the typical Beastmaster Ranger concept, and I was honestly shocked to find how much the Gloomstalker and the Shadow Sorcerer really actually blended together to create this fun, thematic, and actually synergistic build. Nothing feels greater than being this like kind of play on a Beastmaster that just sits in darkness while them and their companions strike from the shadows, dealing massive amounts of damage and basically skulking back to hide, so they're able to dodge really effectively as well. Honestly, it just feels like such a fun combination. It's a shame the full effect of it is not going to come in until the later levels, but you can still find ways to advance it. I would definitely say that Sorcerer 1, Ranger 2, maybe Sorcerer 6, then Ranger, then cap off Sorcerer definitely works. Again, if you can, maybe mix that Hexblade level somewhere in there towards the end game to really, and then kind of retool the build a little bit to see if that works for you. It's not always going to work, but it might. So honestly, play around, and feel free to play around with the equipment as well. If you find you don't really like the lower AC from having medium armor, and you don't mind the stealth disadvantage, maybe you're not playing into that as much, you could go for heavy armor and see how that works. There are some heavy armors that don't impose disadvantage on stealth as well, maybe you just want to go for the armor of persistence, using Ranger Knight from Ranger to be able to gain that heavy armor proficiency regardless. Honestly, play around with this one. There's so many different ways this concept could be taken. I'm just showing you one way, and it might not even be the optimal way. So seriously, play around with it and see what you like. But yeah, that is going to do it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye.